you doing out here on this porch? It's chilly outside. Come on into the party. We're dying to see you.
Oh, our guests have arrived. Welcome, all goblins and ghouls, witches and warlocks, to a night out in Sleepy Hollow presented by the Irvington Halloween Festival. As the full moon rises tonight, we will be enjoying a party that we are throwing for our Spooky Stories winners. They're already here, so I'm sure they're excited to see you. Come, let's go see them. Before we get to these terrifying tales, we want to take a moment to thank all of our volunteers and our sponsors for this event, especially Hampton Design Studio and Shop, the Benton House for hosting us, Eamon, Joseph, and Tommaso from Schlem Corp Entertainment for bringing these screams to your TV screens, and most of all, to you, the viewer, for supporting this festival and for doing your part to reduce the spread of coronavirus.
Now, without further ado, let's get into our first scary spooky story. Tonight, our first story is Who Are You? By Miss Stella Moody. So, give a severed hand for your first story.
Who Are You? By me, Stella Moody. I'm in grade 4 and I go to school at Risma-Cullen IPS School 91. So here's my story. The 12-year-old twins, Larry and Mary, stood over 4 dead bodies they'd lined up in a row on the kitchen tile floor. A possum, raccoon, hedgehog, and armadillo. Something's gone very wrong, Mary said. They felt bad that their spell had killed the possum and raccoon, but the bigger problem was the armadillo and the hedgehog, because those were their classroom pets from school. When the coronavirus pandemic struck and closed down the school, someone needed to take care of the animals. Larry and Mary had volunteered. Now it was fall, and the animals were still with them at their home in Irvington because their school hadn't started up again. They were e-learning. When they'd cast the spell, they thought it was just a joke, a game. They'd found the old book back in March, the day of the pandemic shutdown. It was wedged between 2 different shelves in the school library. The cover was real leather, old and weathered, and the title was written in an alphabet they couldn't understand, maybe runes. When they'd gone to check it out, the librarian told them it wasn't in the catalog. School was shutting down that day because of the pandemic, and the librarian was stressed and her day was hectic. "It's fine," she said. "Just take it." They hadn't even remembered the book until today, the day before Halloween. They'd spent the summer and early fall babysitting their 3-year-old sister, Sarah. They barely saw their parents, both nurses, who were still leaving before dawn and getting home well after dusk to take care of COVID-19 patients. Today, Friday, October 30th, after finishing their e-learning assignment. And with Sarah finally down for a nap, they couldn't think of anything to do. And then they remembered the book. They flipped through the musty old pages. "They looked like recipes," said Larry. "I'm hungry. I wonder if they're delicious." Then they found one they could read, written in English, a strange old kind of English, but readable nonetheless. A spell for bringing death to disease. "What do you think?" said Mary. Larry shrugged. "Sure." So they ransacked the fridge and cupboard and mixed a bowl of lumpy dough made of milk, flour, and sardines. They baked it. Each ate one disgusting biscuit. They did the broomstick dance described in the book. They only had one broom, so Larry had to use a mop. They ran around the outside of the house 13 times counterclockwise. "That was that," Larry said. "Maybe coronavirus is cured," Mary said. "I guess we'll find out when Mom and Dad get home." Instead, when they went to throw the remaining biscuits in the outside trash can, they found the dead possum and raccoon. They'd seen them around at night from their bedroom windows, poking around the garbage cans. Larry, who liked grossing, touched the possum with his finger. "It's still warm," he said. "Maybe it's sleeping," said Mary. "I would wash your finger or cut it off if I were you." "I don't think they're sleeping," said Larry. Next, and even worse, they found their classroom pets, Peter the armadillo and Bob the hedgehog, dead in their cages. Larry gave them both his poke test. Warm, dead, he said. This was our only job, said Mary. They promised our teachers and classrooms that they'd take good care of Peter and Bob. Frantically, Mary flipped through the old book. Wait, she said, there's another spell in Old English. Larry read the title out loud. It was called Magic for the Joining of Life. It's like that first spell killed everything around us, except for us, said Mary. Everything around us, repeated Larry. Uh-oh, he said. Mary's eyes got big. We had one other job. They crept up the stairs to check on Sarah. They stood outside their closed bedroom door and listened. It was silent. They opened the door slowly. They could see the lump of Sarah's little body under the covers. Her face was turned away from them. They tiptoed toward her. Larry had his poke test finger extended. He extended his arm and finger for the poke test. Sarah's hand shot up. Larry startled. She rubbed his arm. Who are you? She said. Larry and Mary breathed a sigh of relief. Sarah always did this when they checked on her. Even in the dark, she rubbed their arms and asked, Who are you? It was super creepy. Who did she think it was? And why was she comfortable rubbing some stranger's arm in the dark? They tiptoed back downstairs. At least we didn't kill our sister, said Larry. But we did kill our classroom pet, said Mary. With cleaning gloves, they assembled the 4 dead bodies on the kitchen tile. Larry and Mary stood over the 4 corpses, thinking, should we try the spell? Asked Mary. It's not really clear what it will do. Do we have a choice? Asked Larry. Well, yes, said Mary. We could be making things worse. Worse than telling the teachers and all our friends at school that we killed Peter and Bob? Asked Larry. They'll think we're lying if we tell them it was a magic spell. What will they think we did? Starve them? Murder them? Mary paused to think, looking worried. Let's do the spell, she said. Larry and Mary followed the spell's directions. They covered each of the corpses with hand towels. They painted their faces with a white paste. They didn't have all the ingredients necessary, so they just used chalk and toothpaste, hoping that would work. Then they did the gross part of the instructions. They mixed up spinach and celery in the blender, along with chicken broth and a dash of olive oil. They poured the concoction on each towel. Our friends will think we drowned Peter and Bob in soup, along with a possum and raccoon, said Larry. We could be making things worse, said Mary. Scared, they sat on the kitchen floor, looking at the drenched lumps under the hand towels, not willing to take the final step. We forgot to wake up Sarah from her nap, said Mary. She'll be up all night now. And she'll see this, whatever this is, said Larry, pointing at the towels covering the lumps. They sat in silence a while longer until it got dark. Mom and Dad will be home soon, said Mary. We have to take the final step, said Larry. They read the magic word out loud. In old-time English 3 times. Life, life, life. And removed the tea towels. They heard Sarah's faint voice upstairs. Who are you? Beneath each tea towel was nothing. Who are you? Said Sarah again from her upstairs bedroom. Larry and Mary looked at each other. It was clear on their faces they both had a bad feeling. They quietly crept up the stairs. They left Sarah's door open a crack. Slowly, they opened it up the rest of the way. In some ways, it was still Sarah, except that she had black, reflective eyes like a possum. Her face was like an armadillo's, long and pinkish. Where her hands and nails had been, there were now raccoon paws with sharp claws. Perhaps worst of all, she had a hedgehog's back, covered in quills, along with a possum's rat-like tail, ringed black and white like a raccoon's, strangely. She had her normal 3-year-old girl feet. Sarah rubbed the armadillo scales on her arm. Who are you? She said. The kids call me Peter, she said back to herself in a slightly different voice. And Bob, Sarah also said, changing her voice a little. Trash, trash, trash. I want trash. She growled in what sounded like 2 voices at once. Mary and Larry heard a car door slam in the driveway. Their parents were home. Quickly, they covered their sister in a blanket, only her human feet poking out. They ran downstairs. Their parents came in the back door, stripped off their scrubs, bagged their clothes, and went straight to their showers. which was their routine coming back from the hospital, so they didn't bring the coronavirus home. Larry and Mary sat on the couch. "What do we do?" asked Mary. "Maybe we run away while we can," said Larry. Their parents came into the living room, rubbing their eyes, looking exhausted. "Hey guys," said Mom. "What a day," said Dad. "How did e-learning go today? How'd it go with your sister?" Larry and Mary didn't say anything, just smiled weirdly. "You guys okay?" said Mom. "What did you break?" said Dad. "Nothing died at all," said Larry. Mary gave him a look that said, "Don't be an idiot." "Ha ha ha," said Dad. "Very funny. Is your sister asleep?" Without waiting for an answer, their parents headed to the stairs. "We'll just peek in on Sarah," said Mom. Mary and Larry sat on the couch, listening to their parents' footsteps climb up the stairs. They heard Sarah's bedroom door squeak open. "Who are you?" That's the end of my story.
How is that for a terrifying tale?
Quite the spooky tale, I say.
We're back here with our grade school winner for the Spooky Stories contest, Stella Moody.
Yay! Now, Stella, what inspired that story? 'Cause it was really, really good. What inspired that?
Well, in the spring, I wrote a similar story, so I sort of changed that and made it my own.
Gotcha. And what was it? What were some of the changes you added to it from the original one?
Well, the original one, instead of having 4 animals, it had like a fish and maybe or a cat. I wasn't sure. It might have involved a babysitter too.
A babysitter. Ooh.
It's always spooky when babysitters are involved. Well, also, I'd like to know, what was your favorite Halloween tradition? What do you like to do on Halloween?
Probably I like to drink hot chocolate and go trick-or-treating. And then I like to sort all my candy afterward.
Yes. Now, we don't get trick-or-treating this year, so do you have any plans for staying at home? Are you going to dress up still?
Uh-huh.
Yeah? What are you going to be?
I'm going to be a zombie bride.
A
Yes!
zombie bride.
We
Yay.
love that. Well, Stella, thank you so much for coming. We had such a blast hearing your story. And did you have fun?
Mm-hmm.
Heck yeah, I had fun too.
Yay. Thank you so much, Stella. Our next spooky story is actually a poem by Lucy Serto called Promises Kept. Enjoy.
My name is Lucy Serto, and I'm a 6th grader at Our Lady of Lourdes. My poem is called Promises Kept. She lived, she lied, she loved, she cried, all until one day. He came along and sang a song and promised he would stay. She said that she'd cut off her head if he went away, and so the very next day. Her head was in a basket, she was in a casket, because he did not stay.
Brentley, did you enjoy that spooktacular story as much as I did?
Well, Kalinda, you know I did.
Fantastic. We're back here with our middle school Spooky Stories winner, Lucy. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm so good.
Fantastic.
So Lucy, what was the inspiration behind your story this year?
Well, I had actually never written a poem before.
You hadn't?
No,
That's fantastic.
but my middle school teacher, or my English teacher, Mr. Davis, actually inspired me to enter this contest. And I really just made this up while I was doing homework one day.
Wow. Well, Mr. Davis, you are an awesome teacher and inspiring all the kids.
How
So-
excited were you to win?
I couldn't believe it. It was crazy.
What did you do when you found out?
I ran downstairs and told my dad, and then I ran back upstairs and told my mom.
Now, we know that Halloween is a little bit different this year, so we know we have to stay inside. Do you have any fun plans inside? Are you going to be dressing up still?
Yes, I'm going to be a French girl, and me and my 2 cousins planned it a couple months ago.
Yeah. Where did that come from? Did you just decide French girl, or did it come from a specific movie or something?
Well, one of my cousins lives in Germany,
Okay.
so we just decided to do French girls.
Yay, that's so
That
exciting.
does sound fun. And one final hard-hitting question. candy corns or chocolate?
Oh, I have to say candy corns.
Yes!
Yay! Thank you so much for being with us, Lucy.
Thank you for
Definitely
having me.
enjoyed your story.
I had a lot of fun making it.
All right. We're now going to hear a very terrifying tale from our high school winner, Cheyenne Carmichael. Unfortunately, Cheyenne isn't able to be with us today, so I will be reading her story in her place. This piece is by our high school winner, Cheyenne Carmichael from Cecina Memorial High School. This is The Night Symphony. The creaking floors and rustling doors, the dancing spirits and monstrous roars. Every day they hide away, but Hallows' Eve they come out to play. They walk outside and children scream and cry. The shadows appear, snuffing out the light, pumpkins smashing, lights going out, trick-or-treating becoming a sport. The kids become the hunt. They chase them down to a musical tune, hiding in bushes and dark corners alike. They hum with delight. As they hide away, ready to play and to devour their prey.
Why, thank you, Kalinda. That was so scary. But we have one more terrifying tale. Are you guys ready? I'm ready. So, let's give a round of applause for one more story by Matt Davis entitled A Bug in the Basement.
Hi, I'm Matt Davis. I am a language arts teacher at Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic School here in Irvington. The title of my story is Bug in the Basement. Heather Morrison had not set foot in Irvington since she left for college. She was now 30 years old. Her head whipped with youthful curiosity in the passenger seat. Her friend, Esther Beth Baker, had been the one person she knew who would still, after all the years away, would still pick her up from the airport. Heather pawed through the shaded contents of her purse, then zipped it closed and let out a long sigh as she gazed out at the reflection of street lamps on the rain-slickened pavement. "You can smoke," Esther Beth offered. "Aw, you remembered." Heather zipped back open the faded purse sitting in her lap. "Thank you. I don't know whether or not to feel ashamed that we haven't seen each other in like 10 years and you knew I wouldn't have quit by now." She slid out a single cigarette, then offered the pack to her old pal. Esther Beth shook her head at the ridiculous offer, but offered Heather a light. It's so impressive when non-smokers carry lighters, Heather thought to herself. She took a long, thoughtful drag on the cigarette. Esther Beth turned the car down Ritter Avenue. Carved jack-o'-lanterns flickered on front porches, grotesquely gnawed by squirrels so that the hollowed pumpkins cast ghastly shadows the carver had never intended. Neighbors strung orange and purple lights from gutters. Every house glittered with triangular candle flicker eyes. The air was crisp with a spicy scent of roast and rot, sifting thickly on the cold midnight blue breeze. "I forgot how crazy Halloween is around here." "How could you forget?" Esther Beth replied. "Don't you remember all the fun we used to have out at the pits back in high school?" The South Irvington Pits was what remained of the abandoned International Harvester plant along Brookville Road on the edge of town. High school kids had long ago cut holes in the chain link fence around the property, some big enough to actually drive a car through, and had long used the pits for Saturday night bonfires and lots of beer. The Halloween party out at the pits, was always the biggest and craziest of the year. "Those were the best times I ever had," said Heather. Her eyes were tearing up in a rare display of emotion. The nostalgia was overwhelming. "Those were the craziest times I ever had," laughed Esther Beth as she eased the car to a stop at the red light at Ritter Avenue and Washington Street. "Hey, what's that?" "What's what?" Esther Beth replied. "That," said Heather, pointing with her cigarette hand at an imposing bronze statue standing in the park on the corner. The statue was of a man who looked undeniably familiar to Heather. He stood there, the statue, 8 feet above eye level, in a flannel shirt, blue jeans, work boots, handyman ensemble, all cast in staid bronze glory. "Oh, that," said her friend, glancing over at the tiny corner park. The reflection of the stoplight glinted red on the wet brick crosswalk before her. "That's Billy Cahill. You remember him, don't you? Used to do a lot of odd jobs." "Billy Cahill, the handyman?" "One and the same," said Esther Beth. The light had turned green, and she pressed the gas pedal. "Are you surprised?" "No," she lied. Esther Beth raised an eyebrow. "I mean, yeah, okay, a little. I really only have one memory of him. I was like, I don't know, 6 or 7. I came running into the house and was sorely met by his hairy ass sticking out from under our kitchen sink. But, now he's a statue, so I guess that's cool. Is he dead or something?" Esther Beth had grown up the oldest of 9 and had a knack for storytelling. She could make you want to cry yourself to sleep by her words alone, and she could send a cold shiver down your neck with a whisper. She looked at Heather, felt sorry for her rootlessness, and smiled. There was so much that had happened since Heather had gone away, so much, and she needed to know what she was coming back to. They had both changed. Irvington had changed. Everything had. It had to. Esther Beth, pulling a strand of her black hair behind an ear, smiled meekly at her friend. "Do you want to hear the story?" Billy Cahill pulled his faded tiger's ball cap down over his bleary blue eyes and hung his head over a steaming cup of black coffee at the South Irvington Mariners Club bar. It was 10:30 in the morning, Saturday, and he vaguely was remembering the night before. He had work later in the afternoon. Tiling a bathroom, big fancy house on Pleasant Run Parkway. He had told the lady he'd be there no later than 8 a.m., which was important because her Doberman needed to be let out each morning at 8:30. They had spoken Thursday, when he was sober. His brain felt like it was being squeezed in a table vise. He regretted bragging to customers about his punctuality. They all knew he was a joke. Shakily, he lifted the black drink to his lips and took a furtive sip so as not to scald his tongue. His head thumped with pain. He felt weak and sore all over. A whiff of vomit came out with a soft belch. Billy winced at the acrid memory of Friday night. This was typical of him. It was the reason why he was never able to hold a regular 9-to-5er. It was the reason he regularly slept in his weather-worn sailboat, up on its trailer in the back lot of the Mariners Club. He had a tender disposition and really a heart of gold, but you just couldn't count on him for shit. He'd work like a dog all week long, but when Friday came along, he just couldn't resist the urge. By Monday morning, he'd be broke again, bumming smokes outside the clubhouse. Irvington people are a practical sort, and they had come to learn what to expect from Billy Cahill. He did good work, but he did it on his own schedule. If he told you 9 o'clock in the morning, you'd be lucky if he was there by noon. Once, when working at the Neumeister's house, installing bathroom cabinets, he had promised, that the whole job would take him just 3 days. It had taken him every bit of 6 months to get those cabinets up in the Neumeister bathroom. Now, everybody knew that Mrs. Neumeister could be a bit on the micromanagerial side when it came to home improvement projects, especially with contractors, but dang, it was a credit to his charming personality that they put up with it for so long. The cabinets looked great, but anyone else probably would have fired him after the first 3 weeks of showing up late, peddling motley excuses, sometimes fuming of alcohol. But he did good work, and he was usually backed up after about 2 weeks. There's good money in odd jobs when over half the town worked in offices downtown. Billy did a little bit of everything. He repaired and built fences, unclogged drains, cut grass, pulled weeds, leveled out and paved driveways, cleared gutters, plowed snow, painted, sanded, constructed, labeled, you name it. With the amount of money he spent on booze over a weekend, he had a hard time turning any job down, no matter how small. In the spring and in the fall, the rains came. Irvington homes were notorious for flooding whenever it rained more than 1/4 of an inch. The whole town had been built on marshy land with bad drainage, and the houses, whose foundations had sunk and cracked a great deal since the Victorian heyday of the town's founding, all took on water in their basements when it rained. The vast majority of Billy's jobs in October had been in sump-pumping, moldy basements, his boots squished with each heavy, hungover step. He hadn't worn dry socks in months. Leaving a crumpled dollar bill on the bar, Billy slid down from his stool and sauntered out into the rain. It was still chilly outside, even though it was late morning. The sky was a leaden gray and still too bright for his bloodshot eyes. He pulled his cap down lower to block out the day. Billy swung his weary body up into the cab of his old Ford pickup and rummaged through his blue jeans pocket for another crumpled piece of paper that bore the address of a new customer. He tooled the pickup out of the gravel lot, plunging his front tires deep into a series of splashy chuck holes, jerkily pulling out onto the road and leaving twin ribbons of chalky gray tire tracks on the black pavement. Moments later, he had arrived at the address. The customer had called him to set up a good time for Billy to swing by and give an estimate for the work. Another flooded basement. After nixing several gracious attempts to hammer down an exact time of arrival, the customer finally gave in and agreed to Billy's vague spectrum of sometime Saturday. The house was dark blue, almost black on the shady side, and twinkled with strands of purple lights hung in preparation for Halloween. Though it was nearly lunchtime, the lights shimmered against the bland backdrop of such a dreary day. An elderly gentleman, in a sweater vest and khaki slacks, descended the front porch steps and extended his hand in greeting. Billy returned a quick wave and gathered his things. He always liked to bring a notebook and pen when giving estimates. People knew he wasn't a professional, but he thought it added a nice touch if he at least went through the motions. The elderly man stood uncomfortably in the middle of the yard in the pouring rain. He looked like someone who never stood in the rain. "Howdy," yelped Billy, struggling to balance the notebook, pen, and his cell phone as he stuffed his pack of Pall Malls deep into the front breast pocket of his flannel shirt. The old man sniffled in the cold rain and waved again. "Basement doors around the back," he said. "Let me show you." With that, the old man turned and disappeared into a gate around the far side of the house. When Billy came through the gate, the old man was impatiently motioning toward the open side door of the basement. "Down there," he said. "Down there." Billy Cahill stood at the top of the stairs leading down into the dank cellar. He could hear the hollow drips of a fully flooded floor down below. The air was sour, and it made it hard to breathe. A barrage of freezing rain pelted the house. "I don't think I caught your name, bub." Billy was buying time. "Pembroke." The old man was still standing in the rain outside the open door. "Henry Pembroke. I'm new here." "Well, Mr. Pembroke, sir, I bid thee welcome. I knew you were new around here on account of the fact that I know most of the folks around here, and when I heard your address, I knew. Nobody's lived in this house in years." "Well," chuckled Pembroke, "I'm sure its dilapidation and abandonment provided plenty of folklore for the yokels over the years. Irvington folks can weave a good yarn, if that's what you mean. Got a light switch somewhere in here?" "I've looked," said Pembroke. "Alas, I can offer you a flashlight if you haven't got one." "Appreciate it," said Billy sheepishly. Any contractor worth his salt carries his own flashlight, at least. Pembroke handed Billy a long black maglite. "Once more into the breach, dear Pembroke." His boots disappeared beneath the stagnant black water. Thin light caught the edges of the doorways and ledges, but without the maglite he would have looked like a complete bumbling fool. It was his daily goal to not let that happen, no matter what life threw at him. Dipping a tape measure into the dark water swirling about his foot, he estimated its depth at nearly 6 inches. A hollow sucking sound rasped from a low spot in the floor. A drain. It sounded like it was working, if slowly. The slurp of the drain was a good sign. "Not the worst I've seen," Billy hollered up the stairs. He played the beam of the maglite across the far wall. This basement flooded regularly. The evidence lay in the rubble of that crumbling wall. All was quiet in the shadowy basement, save from the slurp of the drain and the percussive rhythm of condensation dripping into the dark pools. Billy heard no other sounds, other than a low buzzing sound coming from behind the big furnace. "I better check the electricity before I start working," he thought to himself. Climbing up out of the basement, he told Mr. Pembroke he could be back as early as Monday, but not before. Pembroke was not pleased. Billy pulled out of the driveway, ambivalent to the dissatisfaction of his customer, and left. "It's much worse now." Henry Pembroke was tapping on the driver's side window of Billy Cahill's pickup truck. Billy was groggy and had fallen asleep in Pembroke's driveway. The tapping grew louder, as did Mr. Pembroke's nagging whine. It was Tuesday. "It's much worse now," he repeated, clearly annoyed by both Billy's appearance and groggy demeanor. "It hasn't stopped raining in days. I don't understand why you couldn't have come sooner." "Mr. Pembroke," Billy defended himself, "I'm usually backed up 2 weeks, at least, this time of year. Everybody's basement floods in Irvington. Some are much worse than yours was the other day. Consider yourself lucky I was able to cancel a few appointments and get here as soon as I did, which is now." "Yes, well, Mr. Cahill," retorted Pembroke indignantly, "that may all be well and good in your perspective, which I wager is not a perspective constructed primarily with standards for excellence. But in my view, you are dangerously close to losing this appointment entirely. Standing water in basements is the leading source of structural damage in historic homes. I am not happy, and I want you to fix it." Surmising that Henry Pembroke was not an altogether patient individual. Billy slid out of his truck and toted his toolbox around to the side of the house. More than likely, he'd need to return to the Mariners Club to borrow the club bilge pump, but he wanted to get a pair of fresh eyes on the task at hand first. Procrastination was his forte, and even Pembroke's plaintive bitterness was not enough to make him move any faster. Nevertheless, he descended the slippery steps into the subterranean cenote. Immediately, Billy noticed that the slurp of the drain was muffled, and the buzzing he'd heard before was much louder, almost panicky. The drain must have gotten clogged with basement debris, he thought. He shuffled through the murky water, at least a foot deep now, toward the low spot in the floor where the drain was located. A broom leaned against a wall nearby. Using the handle as a prod, he attempted to force out whatever was blocking the passage of water through the drain. The prodding broomstick struck a rounded surface beneath the water and slid away, almost throwing Billy off balance. The buzz erupted noisily, and Billy jumped away, dropping the broomstick in the process. What appeared to be wings extended from the rippled surface and frantically slapped the black water into a frenzy. Holy shit! Billy scrambled to retrieve the floating broomstick. The wings stretched to their fullest extent, and with a flourish, a dark body surfaced and shot across the water into the darkest corner of the room. The buzzing dropped an octave and continued slow and menacing. Billy backed away cautiously. Pembroke met him outside, his fervorous impatience apparent in his nervously tapping wingtip shoe and crossed arms. "Mr. Pembroke, I'll be right back. I need to grab a few extra tools from my shop." "You just got here." "I know, sir," stated Billy. "But this job is special, and I need to go get a few special things." He hopped into the truck, quickly lit one of his Pall Malls, and spun his bald tires as he reversed out of the driveway. In truth, he only had one other tool in mind that needed retrieving. Whatever that was down there, that thing, it was big. He needed a gun. Rather than argue with Henry Pembroke about the finer points of handgun ownership and the responsibilities that are inherent in brandishing such a tool of death, Billy figured he'd shoot the creature first and explain things later, when his life was no longer being immediately threatened. Pebbles flew from his spinning tires as he thundered down the road, still uncertain of just what exactly he had witnessed. What was that thing? The question looped through his still aching head. For the first time in a long time, Billy was scared. "Mr. Cahill, this is my 5th and will be my final call. This is Henry Pembroke on South Ritter Avenue. Look, if you don't want the work, just please have the decency to return my calls. The water is rising. Goodbye, Mr. Cahill." Billy had not returned that Saturday. Fear, true fear, triggered an ungovernable urge to lay low for a few days, or years, and wait for better weather. His better angels called on him to be heroic, to stand and face it, to fight for what's right and good and just. His better angels made a lot of calls, 5 in this instance. But Billy had a lot of loud devils clattering about his thoughts. He needed to get away, and so he did. No one at the Mariners Club saw him tow his boat out of the gravel lot behind the clubhouse. He had waited until well past nightfall so as to avoid the scrutiny and the rumor milling. He didn't want anyone to notice he was gone. The gate at the Eagle Creek boat docks had been broken for months, allowing one free access to the ramp at all hours of the day or night. As dangerous as it might be to cast off your lines alone in the middle of the night, in breezy October? No one was watching. The DNR did not patrol the lake, and if you kept your lights turned off, nobody would even notice a boat out on the water. At least, nobody would notice until sunrise. Billy had spent many nights out on the lake, undetected, beneath the starry, inky sky. A loon cried out from across the water somewhere, hidden in some inlet in a stand of cattails skittering in the wind. Billy paddled out from the dock. He saw no point in raising the mainsail. He was in no hurry, per usual, and he didn't want to attract attention to the bright white sails of his boat. The gentle lap of the water smacking the hull, his paddle dipping into the soft dermis of the lake in the night. The sounds surrounding him painted a stark contrast to the noise of his mind. Henry Pembroke slammed his fountain pen with an angry slap on his writing desk. He had come into his library to tie up some loose ends, balance his checkbook, write in his journal — he was a devoted diarist — and enjoy his cup of tea, a spicy tiger of black tea he had personally shipped in from India at a bi-monthly rate of delivery. His beagle, Roosevelt, had been incessantly howling at the rising water in the basement for the past 10 minutes. Boo! Boo! Roosevelt! That's enough now! Pembroke rose from his desk and crammed his stockinged feet into his monogrammed slippers. He shuffled from the library into the hall and habitually flipped the basement light switch, though it was still not working. Boo! Boo! Silence. The stairwell to the basement was pitch black, but Pembroke could detect some movement near the landing due to the suffused light spilling down the steps from the kitchen window. Roosevelt? The old man whispered. The silence and movement was followed by a splashing sound and then a low buzzing, like an old refrigerator on its last legs. Pembroke went abruptly rigid with fear. Roosevelt, he repeated. He inched down the stairs in the dark. A heavy feeling came over him as he began to imagine that his loyal hound had somehow electrocuted himself in all the standing water. The splashing had ceased, but the buzzing was getting louder, seemingly more personal, with each step Pembroke took down into the basement. Once he reached the landing, he had to stop. The water, to his bitter discontentment, had risen to a depth of probably 4 feet. Varied bits of basement debris floated on the surface, some of it beaching on the landing as the ripples lapped in and saturated Pembroke's monogrammed slippers. With just the thin memory of the light falling into the basement from the kitchen, the old man squinted to find his dog. It was nearly impossible to see into the pitchy underchambers of his house, more than a few feet away anyway, but he didn't need to. Everything he needed to see, to understand, everything he needed to accept, came floating right up to his feet. Pembroke buckled in torment. Roosevelt's bloody corpse, or what was left of it, bobbed in the water at the edge of the landing. His body looked like it had been carved out like a Thanksgiving turkey. Only the dog's pleading face, locked in an eternal grimace of despair, remained to deliver the horrific indication that there was more than water rising out of his basement. Hey, shipwreck. He looked up from his coils of braided dock lines, the moldy docks. Sarah could always find him here. When others failed, she could always find him. I don't know if I need a new nickname, he replied, looking askance at her from his boat. "But I have been shipwrecked before, 3 times. It's an enlightening experience, mostly." She stooped, uneasy on the slippery dock planks, to sit with her legs dangling into the rocking, bobbing boat. "Oh, yeah," she said as she lit a cigarette, her hands cupped around her lighter, shading her round face from the long light of the western sun, which was sitting low on the tree line across the lake. "Well, I suppose I've got time for a story, if you're offering a rare glimpse into your watery, dare I say, murky past. Hey now." "Oh, you know I'm just kidding. You were seriously shipwrecked? That's unbelievable. I mean, amazing. I didn't know that still happened." "Yeah, well, nobody ever said life at sea was easy." "Yeah, well, I know that. What I don't know is what being shipwrecked is like. Anyway, I doubt it. How come I've never heard about this prior to now?" "Like you said, it's a rare glimpse. Loose lips sink ships." She laughed and blew cigarette smoke in his eyes. "Once in Sicily for about a year," he started. "Just like St. Paul, wasn't it? Sun-soaked days, dusty African wind, the driest wine." Sarah slid into the boat, the water lapping the gunwales as it settled again on its keel. She offered him the pack. He took it, lit himself a smoke, and drew in deep and long on the first drag. "They've got this idea over there, you know, about loyalty. It's a big deal to them. I mean, it's a big deal to us too, right? But not like that, though. They've got it all categorized down to the smallest loyalties you owe. Over here, we're Americans. Yeah, sometimes you might say, 'I'm a Buckeye from Ohio,' or an Okie from Oklahoma, something like that. Eastsiders, maybe. Over there, though, they've got the church bell." "A bell? I don't follow," she said, eyebrows raised. "How's it any different?" "They're loyal to that bell. They call it Campanilismo. The people who hear that bell, they live by you, right? They work next to you. Your kids go to the same schools." She nodded. "They're supposed to have your back, no matter what. They've heard that bell from their backyards, same as you have, you know, their whole lives. Every wedding, every funeral. That bell rang out the hours of their lives, same as yours. That's who you owe your loyalty. You've breathed the same air, drank the same water. It's something like blood at that point, you know?" "Then what the hell are you doing up here, Billy? Irvington needs you, and they need you right now. Now is not the time for shipwrecks. The bell is ringing." By the time Billy pulled his boat back into the gravel lot of the South Irvington Mariners Club, the news had gotten out. The neighborhood was in a state of frenzy, and everyone knew someone who had gone up to Henry Pembroke's house on South Ritter to do battle with the embodiment of evil swishing around in his basement floodwater. In truth, no one had taken up Pembroke's vendetta, despite its exorbitant prize money. Nevertheless, word got out that whatever the creature was, it appeared to be some kind of enormous insect that could swim like an otter. It seemed to thrive in the debris-strewn black water of corrosive backflush swelling up in the basement. It had been raining for 27 straight days, but it seemed not able to leave the water. Despite this alleged fact, Irvingtonians began to fear the species might spread to other houses, and everybody in Irvington gets water in their basements. It's as Irvingtonian as apple pie, or however the saying goes. Billy Cahill, loyal son of South Irvington, U.S. Navy veteran, neighborhood handyman. He stood outside the Pembroke house with his feet spread heroically more than a mere shoulder width apart. In his right hand, a stainless steel marlin spike, a tool used by sailors around the world for centuries to assist in loosening salt-encrusted knots, and for inevitably being brandished in many a drunken shore-leave brawl in some ne'er-do-well cantina. In his left hand, he carried a .357 Magnum with a humble matte black finish. Then he remembered that he was, indeed, a righty, and it made more sense to carry the pistol in his dominant hand. He switched the two weapons and glared back at the house defiantly, unwilling to accept its judgment of his rough-and-tumble character, or, in fact, his own fate. Some of us, in the maddening drama that is life in a historic suburb, are at times called to defend and protect the defenseless, the meek as well as the mild. Our lukewarm existence between the hustling city slicker and the back-breaking bumpkin requires a special kind of heroism. It takes a special kind of person. Honestly, I'm not sure if Billy Cahill was indeed special, so to speak, but the guy certainly had a chip on his shoulder about being scared out of a basement by a bug. He hadn't done that since kindergarten. Billy had a debt to settle. "I don't care what you have to do, Mr. Cahill," called out Henry Pembroke from the top of the front porch steps. "But that thing down there, it kept me up all night. The buzzing is at an ear-piercing decibel level at this point, and it's begun to scratch at the basement ceiling. I fear it will soon begin to dig through. Though a lifelong vegetarian, I do not hesitate in requesting that you kill it. Kill it. It is evil incarnate, and it bores holes in the floor beneath my library. Kill it today. I always appreciate it when both customer and contractor can come to a congenial consensus viewpoint on the work at hand, Mr. Pembroke." Billy jogged around to the side of the house and dramatically booted the side door in. The water had risen up over the landing and gushed out onto the side yard, soaking Billy's work boots. "And that's why I stopped wearing socks," he said aloud, though Pembroke was well out of earshot, still standing on the front porch steps. He slipped into the water, brandishing the gun in his right hand, the marlin spike in his left, and awkwardly gumming the maglite in his mouth. In the flooded basement, as he trudged through the water, cluttered with postcards from another lifetime, album covers, unwound skeins of soggy yarn, and clumps of lint from the dryer, he knew he was at a disadvantage. The buzzing was so loud it felt like his head would split from the high-pitched pressure, shattering like a crystal wine glass before the powerful arias of an opera soprano. The piercing buzzing was interrupted only by short gasps from the basement drain pipe, swirling like a maelstrom somewhere off in the dark, and hellish screeches from the creature as it dove and resurfaced excitedly. Its next meal had just arrived. Billy swished his way across the room to the furnace. He stood with his back to the metal machinery and tried very hard to see. A tendril of light fell down from the loose-fitting ductwork. He could hear Pembroke pacing the floor in his cozy library, all oak and leather and pipe tobacco, the antithesis of this watery hell he found himself in. In the tight-fisted light he was allotted, Billy took aim at the shadowy form rising in the water in front of him. The creature, inarguably, looked like an insect of some kind, like a cockroach, he supposed, but with spines protruding from its back and much larger than any bug he'd ever seen. The spines dripped with a sallow liquid, and the air was putrid, a septic odor that choked Billy as he took aim and fired his .357. 3 times he fired, and 3 times he hit his target. The bug squealed in agony, or rage, and its sallow spines swelled as if to erupt. 3 spines spat a hot, acidic goo toward the gun, and Billy watched helplessly as the pistol melted in his hand. The gun was so hot he dropped it into the dark water, and it sizzled as it submerged. The bug advanced, sharking directly at him as Billy braced for impact against the thin metal ductwork of the old furnace. The bug barreled into his chest and tore through his shirt. Billy yowled in pain as the bug chewed mercilessly into his flesh. It was eating him alive. Switching the marlin spike back into his dominant hand, Billy swung his clenched fist down as hard as he could. It bent and broke on the creature's durable exoskeleton as the bug continued to gnaw deep into Billy's chest unabated. The steel weapon was too weak. The gun was melted beyond recognition or use. Billy tossed in the water as blood spurted from his chest. The bug, ravenous with bloodlust, grew stronger and more deliberate. Each piercing bite burned, and the pain was unbearable. In his panic, Billy thrashed his arms and splashed helpless in the water as Mr. Pembroke paced upstairs. In his thrashing, his hand knocked open the electrical panel. The fuse box. Hope lingered. With tears welling at the corners of his quivering eyes, Billy grabbed a thick black cable from the box and yanked. A surge of purple light pulsed through his body, and in the flash that followed, Billy speared the unbridled cable into the space between the bug's exoskeletal plates. He found tender, insect flesh within. The bright explosion shook the whole house and sent Billy and the bug soaring across the flooded room. A wide, scorched rupture behind the insect's blood-splattered head oozed with acidic yellow goo. Pulses of peripheral electricity webbed across the water in the dark. Billy lay dead and floating, burned to a crisp by the voltage of the cable, bits of laundry lint sticking undignified to the side of his charred face. As the bug's ruptured head sunk below the water, the surface populated with larval pods encased in thin yellow membrane that congealed and began to stick to each other like slimy yellow bubble wrap floating on the surface of the silent ripples. The membranes bobbed about, and after forming a critical mass began to hatch. Nymph-like creatures rose dazzlingly from the dirty water. If it wasn't a filthy basement, it would have been a beautiful spectacle. The nymphs formed around each other and swarmed around the room. Their movements were aggressive, violent, like someone who had suddenly lost their sense of sight. Together, their rapid wings made the room erupt in a loud buzzing. The swarm careened around the room and hovered over Billy's lifeless, charred body, still floating among the debris. As if on signal, the swarm raced into Billy's voiceless mouth and burrowed deep into his body. In the aftermath of what happened, said Esther Beth Baker as she pulled into the driveway, Mr. Pembroke bought that corner and paid for the statue. He said he felt it was the right thing to do. Wait, interjected Heather. You're telling me that Billy Cahill, ass-crack handyman extraordinaire, basically saved humanity from some hellish beast from the insect netherworld of clogged Irvington basement drains? And then some quasi-British wealthy eccentric bought prime Washington Street real estate and dedicated some memorial to the hometown hero? And you expect me to believe that? Esther Beth winked at her old friend. I just thought you should know what you're coming home to. It's not the Irvington we grew up in anymore. Right, and it's not like anyone was ever going to do anything better with that corner either. Prime Washington real estate? Yeah, right. You're for real about this, aren't you? Heather could scarce believe what she was hearing. The story was far-fetched, but the fact that her best friend actually believed it was even more shocking. Look, Heather, said Esther Beth. "If you don't believe me, fine. Tomorrow, you can go see for yourself. The thing's up there at the Bonnet Thompson. Mr. Barnett had it encased in resin. Caveat emptor, it is disgusting to look at. Bigger than I ever imagined, too. 5 feet long and 2.5 feet wide. Can you imagine one of those things crawling up into the basement the next time it rains?" Heather shuddered at the thought. She hated bugs. Everybody does. A pair of bicycles chimed their bells as Esther Beth and Heather pedaled past the old Anderson Cemetery. They were laughing about old times. As roommates, they actually shared a lot of common interest and spent more time with each other than apart. "That's where he's buried," Esther Beth said, pointing at a lone limestone grave marker overlooking Pleasant Run Creek, which burbled childishly below a steep bluff. "Billy Cahill." "That story still gives me the creeps," said Heather. "I saw a roach on the counter at work last week and totally freaked out. Like, it was bad. I probably screamed louder and longer than I would have had I never heard that gruesome tale. So, thanks for that." "My pleasure," Esther Beth sneered. "I'll race you down to Walgreens. They're the only store that carries my favorite kombucha." "Cool," said Heather. "On your mark, go!" "Hey, that's not fair." The two friends pedaled off past the cemetery, squealing with glee, while the honeyed joys of their rekindled friendship spilled down around them on such a beautiful golden day. In the loam covering the grave of Billy Cahill, a small set of pincers worked its way up from the dirt. A bug, much like a cockroach but with protruding yellow spines along the length of its back, crawled out from the soil and scuttled away toward a nearby street drain. Another set of pincers, another bug surfaced, then another, and another. The end.
Now that story could have scared a ghost. We're back here with Matt Davis, our adult Spooky Stories winner.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here in the terrifying Benton house.
Terrifying? What do you mean?
Well, it's nighttime. This place just always is giving me kind of the creeps.
Oh, this is where I like to be all the time. Spooky.
I prefer a place a little bit warmer, if you know what I mean.
So, tell us a little bit about this story, because it honestly was extremely creepy and scary.
Well, thank you. I worked very hard on this story. It's called Bug in the Basement, and it takes place in Irvington. Mm-hmm. And for those people at home maybe that don't know about Irvington, people in Irvington definitely know this, that we all get water in our basements at some point. And tonight it's thundering outside, the rain is coming down, and the water is rising.
Get your floaties ready, y'all.
Yes. Now we understand that one of our other Spooky Story winners for middle school is actually one of your students.
That's right.
Correct?
That's right, Miss Lucy Serto.
Yes.
She wrote a poem.
Yes. And how exciting was it for you to both enter on the same year and end up winning?
Well, I've wanted to win for years now, and I've worked hard at it, and finally I got to win. But this isn't the first of my students who has won this award. So
really?
my son has won this twice in the elementary age group. And then last year, a student, Mary Eifert, she won the middle school category. And so here we are again from Our Lady of Lourdes with another middle school winner in Lucy Serto.
3 times the charm, yes! And she definitely gave us a really, really good story, so props to that. Props to you. Great teaching skills.
Thank you.
So I have to ask,
Sure.
what is your favorite costume you've ever had growing up, as far as Halloween?
Well, I've had a lot of good ones. I was Indiana Jones one year, and another year I portrayed someone from the movie Braveheart.
Nice.
So I had a lot of fun with that. But if there was one that stood out over the years, it was one that my mother made for my brother and I, and I just remember how much I hated it because it itched and it just stuck into my neck. And there's a famous photo at my mom and dad's house, and my brother's standing there smiling ear to ear, and I'm just the waterworks.
Aww.
Screaming and crying. But I've always loved Halloween, so it didn't ruin it for me.
It's the best time of year.
So you love Halloween, but I have a question. Could you live as a Halloween character for the rest of your life? And if you were, what Halloween character would that be? Typical stereotypes.
Well, I like the part-time nature of the werewolf.
Yes.
A weekend a month. It's sort of like what do they call it? The National Guard. I think I could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. All right. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us.
I don't know about the fleas.
Yeah, that might get to you after a while.
Please.
And I'm pretty sure your shampoo bill would be through the roof.
Right, but it's important to have good hair.
That's right. That's right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for reading your story. We had a blast with that.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Yes.
It's my pleasure.
Give it up again for your adult spooky story winner, Matt Davis. Now, it wouldn't be a true Irvington Halloween festival if we didn't uphold our longest tradition. Back in 1819, Washington Irving was out scaring all of the Irvingtonians with the legend of Sleepy Hollow.
And tonight, we're going to continue that tradition by reading you that story of Ichabod Crane and his demise at the hands of the Headless Horseman.
Our story begins with Ichabod Crane, a young teacher who moved from his hometown in Connecticut to a small village called Sleepy Hollow, where he was to become the schoolmaster. Sleepy Hollow was a quiet, small town said to be under some kind of enchantment. The residents all seemed to move a little slower, daydream a little more, and believe in unearthly magic more than other people.
Sleepy Hollow's residents were all also descendants of the village's original Dutch settlers, and the village had more than its fair share of supernatural occurrences. Sleepy Hollow's most famous supernatural phenomenon was the ghost of the Headless Horseman, which is said to be the Hessian soldier who lost his head to a cannonball during the Revolutionary War. The horseman has been seen around the church, where local historians claimed he had been buried. The Headless Horseman was believed to have been always in search of his long-lost head. Ichabod Crane was fascinated by this story, and he was so inclined to believe in the supernatural.
Ichabod was a strict teacher, but not a cruel one. He made almost no money out of teaching, but he felt quite fulfilled in his new role. He stayed with different villagers who would put him up and feed him in exchange for teaching their children. While teaching the young villagers, Ichabod fell in love with Katrina Van Tassel, a beautiful young woman of 19. Katrina was the only child of Baltus Van Tassel, a beautiful... I just mixed it up again. Ichabod was a strict teacher, but not a cruel one. He made almost no money out of teaching, but he felt quite fulfilled in his new role. He stayed with different villagers who would put him up and feed him in exchange for teaching their children. While teaching the young villagers, Ichabod fell in love with Katrina Van Tassel, a beautiful young woman of 19. Katrina was the only child of Baltus Van Tassel, one of the more successful farmers in the area. Charmed by her flirtatious nature, Ichabod soon began to visit the Van Tassel farm more and more frequently to try to woo her. Ichabod was not alone in his romantic interests in Katrina, however. Her beauty and charm had entranced many other men in the village, specifically the formidable Brom Van Brunt. also known as Brom Bones. Brom was notorious for his boisterous personality, love of pranks, and great skill at horseback riding, all of which made him something of a village hero.
To scare Ichabod out of wooing the beautiful Katrina, Brom started pulling elaborate pranks on him. First, he filled Ichabod's schoolhouse with smoke, and then he trained a dog to follow Ichabod home and howl at all hours of the day and night, as well as many other pranks to frustrate and humiliate Ichabod. One day, Ichabod and Brom were invited to a Halloween party at the Von Tussels, with the rest of the town, that is. In an attempt to charm Katrina and distract Ichabod, Brom sung of the old town tale of the Headless Horseman, lyrically painting the story of how the Headless Rider would often be seen riding all night on All Hallows Eve, only to disappear at the end of the bridge. Katrina and the other guests simply enjoyed the tale and resumed dancing. Ichabod, however, left the party haunted by the tale of the Headless Horseman, and defeated by Katrina's disregard his efforts to woo her.
As he headed home, the path seemed eerily dark, and Ichabod swore he heard a soft thumping. Logically, he thought, it must be frogs on the river, or birds in the trees, as the Headless Horseman was only a town legend. Riding past the haunted Major Andre's tree, Ichabod saw a large dark figure looming nearby. Ichabod called out to the figure, but it gave no response. As Ichabod rode on, the figure began to follow him down the path, riding a large, dark horse. Ichabod, who was greatly disturbed, tried to outride his pursuer. Then he noticed the rider did not have a head on his shoulders, but the head seemed to be sitting on the saddle in front of the body.
The two were close to the church, and Ichabod remembered Brom's song that the horseman would disappear at the bridge. He coaxed his horse faster to race to the edge of the bridge before the horseman could reach him. Ichabod welcomed the comfort of the familiar bridge and crossed it swiftly. He allowed himself one final look over his shoulder to see if the ghost had followed.
The horseman threw his detached head at Ichabod as he could not reach him and managed to knock Ichabod off of his horse. Ichabod's horse returned to its owner's farm, but there was no sign of Ichabod. A search party found hoof prints and Ichabod's hat with a smashed pumpkin left next to it. Ichabod was never heard from again in Sleepy Hollow. Some townspeople believe that Brom Bones had pulled off a great prank, which put Brom in the final position to marry Katrina. But the old women and local folklore maintained that he was taken by the Headless Horseman.
We hope you enjoyed that eerie entertainment. We want to thank all of our participants as well as our winners for the Scary Story contest.
We hope you enjoyed this night out in Sleepy Hollow presented by the Irvington Halloween Festival, and we look forward to seeing all of your frightening faces at next year's festival. Don't forget to leave out Moonwater for the Irvingtonian witches.
Bye! Happy Halloween!